Hi everyone, Gemma here, thanks for watching today. In this video I'm going to be mixing and matching two collections, the Shutter Die collection and the Whatever the Weather collection. So I'll be using this Snowflake stencil. These are the Christmas sentiment stamps. This is the Whatever the Weather stamp and die set. So I'll be using the snowflakes from this set, which I'm just pointing out. I've then also brought in the Ditzy embossing folder. And then this is the 5x7 Effortless Shutter Die. So I'm just going through the cutting guide with you. So that's the card base. So you want one of those. Then you want two pieces of the matte panel. One for the center panel. One, two. So I think everything will become more clearer as we move along. So the first step that I'm going to do is start to ink blend my panels. So I'm using 3 Distress Oxide inks. So I have Victorian Velvet, Seedless Preserves and Uncharted Mariner. To help affix the white panels to the pink board there, I've used some repositionable spray to help hold them down so that I can follow the same pattern consistently across all 4 pieces. So a good tip for ink blending is make sure you have a really juicy ink pad. So that will help the transition between the 3 colours. So I'm just finishing off now with the Uncharted Mariner. And I did find that it was difficult to blend these 3 colours together. So you can see me going back and forth several times to try and get the blend that I want. But I found once it had a chance to dry that it was more of a consistent, even finish on the ink blend. So as I said, I'm going back and forth now between the colours to make sure that I have the blend that I want. I'm just going to hit it with my heat gun to help it dry off a bit. And then I've set that to one side and I'm working on the card base. So I've just reinforced those score lines. Now I'm folding and burnishing those. Next I bring in those 2 green panels which I've dry embossed. I didn't quite like the look of those, so I've brought in some scrap mirror card and I'm going to cut 2 additional pieces for the front of the card. And then attaching those with some double-sided tape. And I'm using a stamping block there to tear the edges off to give me a cleaner finish. I've then removed some of the backing paper from one side of the double-sided tape, lined it up and then removed the rest. I've attached both panels then using some collal glue onto the front of the card base. I'm now working on the belly band. So I've reinforced the score lines. I'm going to attach those together using some quick grab glue. Just checking here to see that it all fits. Got some nice wiggle room there, so I'm attaching that together. Checking that it can move up and down on that card base fine. So I'm just assembling my topper now. So I'm adding the first white circle using some foam tape. And I've added some collal glue on the foam tape, so I've got that little bit of extra wiggle room. I've then cut another circle in the green, in the teal cardstock, and attaching that with some foam tape. I'm then going to set that smaller circle aside so I can start to heat emboss on that. So I've popped it in my stamping platform. I'm using the sentiment Frosty Wishes, which I've snipped so that the sentiment fits in the circle. I'm just prepping my surface now with some anti-static powder, and I'm using Versamark on the stamp. So I've stamped it twice to make sure I've got a good impression. So it looks like I'm happy with that now, so I'm going to use Wow Metallic Silver embossing powder. So just off camera there, I'm preheating my gun for about a minute and then setting that embossing powder with the tool. And I'm just adding some double-sided foam tape to add the third piece then onto that topper. So next I'm going to start working on the panels. So I've brought in the Snowflake stencil there, and I'm just attaching it with some washi tape onto the pink mat and placing my first panel underneath. So as you can see, the stencil is 6 by 6 and we're working on a 5 by 7 card. So I'm going to have to readjust the stencil so I have a continuous pattern. So I'm using some Cosmic Shimmer Glitter Kiss, and I'm just using a palette knife to spread that paste all over the stencil. So this is my first time doing a technique like this, and later on you'll see the mistakes that I make. So hopefully I can help you learn. So I'm just setting that to one side and finishing off the rest of the panels. I've finished those now, so I'm trying to help the drying process along using my heat gun. And now I'm placing the stencil back over that piece and continuing that pattern on the rest of the card. So same process again, just using the palette knife. And I've continued that with the rest of the panels. Next I'm working on the sentiment that will go inside the card. So when you open the shutters you will see this. So I'm using the circle die as a guide of where to place my stamps. I'm prepping the surface once again with that anti-static powder, stamping using Versamark, and then going back in with that Wow Metallic Silver embossing powder. So while my panels are drying, I'm going to work on the rest of the embossing for the card. So I've brought in the Snowflake stamps from Whatever the Weather stamp and die set. And the same process again, I'm prepping my surface, stamping with Versamark, and then adding the metallic embossing powder. And setting with the heat tool, making sure it's nice and hot so it doesn't warp the paper as much and it melts the embossing powder quickly. So now that's all set with the heat tool, I'm just dividing them up into 4 pieces ready to die cut them in my machine. So I'm using the mini die cutting machine from Made to Surprise, and it's a really small but mighty machine. I've said that several times before. So I've moved on now to adding the embossed snowflakes on the front of the topper, And what I like to do when using snowflakes is add a little gem in the centre for that extra bit of bling. And just bring it up the camera so you can see it a little bit better, and setting that to one side. So here comes my first mistake. So I go to attach the panels to the card and realise that they're too small. So not to waste the time spent on creating those snowflake panels, I just decided to trim down the card base and also add in that mirror cardstock. So I'm just showing you the final result with all the panels stuck down. And then this is where I make my second mistake. I need to cut an aperture in that panel to show the sentiment. And as I put it through my die cutting machine, it's flattened all of the paste. So you can see a slight variation in the pattern. It gives a more of an embossed look rather than the texture that you have with the paste. But I've carried on and added the frame there in white. Next, I'm just lining up that centre panel in the middle of the card base and placing my sentiment behind, making sure that everything lines up. And it looks like I'm happy with that, so I'm adding that pressure to get that white panel stuck down. Next, I'm adding some foam tape on the back of the aperture panel. And when I'm doing this, I'm being mindful of the shutter pieces. So I don't want the panel to sink, but also I don't want those double-sided strips to catch on the shutter mechanism piece, so that it prevents it from working. So here's my third mistake now. I've attached the panel and it's upside down, so it doesn't continue the pattern all the way across. But I do notice this at the end when I'm taking photographs. So I was able to peel it off and attach it back down. So sorry I'm slightly off camera there, but I fed in the shutter pieces. And what you want to do is make sure that the score lines match the end of that aperture panel, and add some quick grab glue. So I'm putting some pressure on the card base and I've set it to one side. Put something heavy on it to make sure it dries, and as you can see there, it all works fine. So because I had to trim down my card base, I had to recut the front pieces, so I'm just attaching those now. And then I'm just adding some more of those embossed snowflakes to add a bit more interest to the inside of the card. So I've left all my mistakes in just to show you that it does happen, but you can correct them, and I'm happy with how the card turned out. So I'm showing you the final result here, a bit closer to the camera so you can see it. So I still haven't noticed the center panel is in the wrong orientation at this point, but I just want you to see that that glitter kiss is absolutely beautiful against the ink blended background, and I'm absolutely in love with how it's turned out. So a slightly different video to normal. I've added a voiceover and sped up a lot of the footage, but I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's provided some inspiration for you. You'll also find more inspiration on the videos linked in the description box below, and they are the best of Made to Surprise 2022, and it's some bundles that have been created to mix and match all the collections together. At the time of filming, they're still currently on offer, and I'll provide a link in the description box below to these bundles available over on Craft Stash. So thank you very much for watching this video, which is part of my 12 Days of Christmas series, and the last video is coming tomorrow, so I hope to see you there. Thanks very much for watching. I'll see you soon. Bye.